I do continuing ed. And it's, so you look over there and she asks him how his day went. And he does one of these, I don't want to talk about it. Well, okay, we're going to score them bad. They're not doing well. To drop a card off on my way out. But that's a failed bid, and it's an obvious failed bid. Failed bids leads to less bidding. Because once you get your hands snapped like that, you don't want to bid anymore. So it gets kind of quiet, and that's not good. But there's another form of failure in the response, and that's when the bid is almost missed. And this is happening a lot with these things. So now she asked him how his day was, and he's, huh? Yeah, it's that. That's the failed bid. Now, here's a curious thing, that the studies show that failed bids of that second variety over time is more damaging to the relationship than the obvious rejection in terms of a failure. Why do you think that would be? Loud.
There still was a connection, even though it was a negative connection.
Exactly. There's still a connection. It's a negative connection, but there's still something going on there. The other thing is it's so obvious that then there's a greater chance to actually work through it and to do a repair of it. So the bidding process goes on. When this bidding process continues, at some point they're building what we used to talk about. You remember the phrase, the emotional bank account? The idea that you're actually building a reserve of positivity. I think Stephen Covey was the one who sort of coined that phrase, and it's a good one. But you build this emotional bank account, this surplus of positivity, meaning, boy, I'm starting to feel really good about Margie. I'm really starting to feel good about her. And she's, of course, feeling incredibly good about me. And so what happens is this couple starts to experience a form of separation anxiety. Now, separation anxiety, you think, wait a minute, Tim, I think you got your psychology off here. That's what little infants experience, isn't it? When they get into toddlerhood and you leave them with grandma for the first night and they start to throw a temper tantrum. Well, that's because, yeah, the attachment that they have with mom and dad is being somehow threatened. It's being jeopardized by virtue of leaving them with the grandparent. And so the child feels this sense of, this doesn't feel right, right? They want back to mommy. Well, that's akin to what you now are experiencing as you're developing this relationship with this other person. So this separation anxiety, it's a pain that isn't necessarily conscious, but it still feels real, and it says, I don't want to miss this person. I don't want to lose this person. This feels great. And if this feels this great now, can you imagine what being married to this person would be like? And so they enter into commitment. Now, in one sense, in another sense, they've been committed throughout the course of their dating. But it's a different type of commitment. The guy that I mentioned out at the Center for Marriage Studies in Denver, and by the way, Howard Markman and John Gottman, they used to work together at Indiana University in Bloomington. And then they went separate ways. And so the neat thing about their research, if you ever read it, is that they replicate each other's research. And that's neat, because now you're validating these things. And we've got about 40 years of research that has really greatly informed us as clinicians. Because it used to be that the way we did our work as marriage therapists was kind of, well, one of two ways. I would either take my ideas of what a good marriage is, and I would try to turn you into that. Or I would teach you how to do what counselors often do, which is just kind of listening and summarizing and feeding it back, and we get couples to learn to communicate that way, and that's how we were trying to work it. The third thing we would do is what we call behavior exchange. We would basically have you kind of come up with a contract, and so you, Jim, would say, here's what I want from my wife, and I can't remember your wife's name. Denise would say, well, here's her list, and of course hers is a lot longer. And then they would exchange their list, and we'd sort of, say, all right, now you start doing this, and you start doing this. It's quid pro quo, right? As long as you do for me, I'll do for you. And it worked until it didn't. Because as soon as Jim started, taking his eye off the ball and looking at work and paying attention to all the other stuff he had going, Denise said, "Oh, I'm not playing this game. I'm not," so then she fell off, and the whole relationship just deteriorated. John Gottman and Howard Markman changed the complexion of how we do marital therapy because they said, no, wait a minute, there's a theory here. Let's understand it. Let's don't just do research the way we used to do it, where we just study the couples who come to counseling, because that's like only studying people who are unhealthy. So maybe it would be better if we actually looked at some couples that are doing well. And that's where, in these comparative methodologies, they can say, look, what's different about these people? The masters of marriage and the disasters of marriage. And what we found is they can go from disaster to master. Believe it or not, they can also go from master to disaster in less than a year.